It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Judith Rodin, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And the reason why I came out to speak to you today and introduce her is because we asked Dr. Rodin to speak to this conference a number of months ago, because under her leadership, the Rockefeller Foundation has initiated a number of programs, such as the 100 Resilient Cities program, that is focused on helping cities build the infrastructure and answer the questions that are necessary to become more resilient as challenges like climate change and social unrest and population growth occur. In addition, it's somewhat unsurprising that the Rockefeller Foundation also decided subsequently to become a supporter of this conference, which is why I'm out here. The Times has a strict policy of not allowing people to speak on our stage simply because they give us money. In this case, we actually asked Dr. Rodin to come and speak before she and the foundation gave us any money. And in keeping with our policies, it's important to us that we make that completely transparent to everyone here. And so with that, it is my deep pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Judith Rodin to come speak from the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you.
So I guess I can't say thank you for that paid advertisement, right? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks to Michael Kimmelman and the New York Times for focusing us on the future of cities. Undoubtedly, the first 15 years of the 21st century have proven that the road to the future is not going to be a straight line. For cities, it's no longer if they'll be hit by a disruption that threatens to really take them off course or stop progress in its tracks. It's almost a matter of when, and how long will it take for that city to get back on course. I would argue that there are three global forces colliding to make crisis the new normal for so many cities. The first is the demographic and migratory tsunamis that are causing major urban transformation. The global urban population is growing by 63 million people annually, equivalent to adding 7 Chicagos a year, according to a recent McKinsey Global Institute report. Nearly half of the global GDP growth between 2010 and 2050 will come from 400 cities in emerging markets. And many developed world cities, from London to Athens to Los Angeles, are seeing greater volumes of immigration and shifts in the composition of their populations. These shifts bring new opportunities and new challenges in housing, education, economic development, and social identity. And cities are working harder and harder to bridge socioeconomic divides and build a sense of community among new and lifelong residents who are now living as neighbors. The second trend is globalization. We're more connected than ever before. Contagion, whether it's health or financial or otherwise, doesn't respect borders any longer. We learned that yet again in the recent Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which sent people to the emergency room right here in New York City. The third trend is climate change, which has led to dramatic fluctuations in rainfall, sea level rise, longer and longer periods of more intense heat, and the disturbance of natural ecosystems. All three trends have had structural, social, and natural urban systems effects. Every week, then, we see a major disruption in a city somewhere in the world, more than one even in one day sometimes. For example, 2 weeks ago, the New York Stock Exchange brought trading to a halt, while United Airlines brought its fleet to a standstill, all because of separate computer glitches. It would have been a Wall Street Journal reporter's dream, except they went down too. 3 technological failures, any one of which individually could have caused great disruption in the lives of New Yorkers in their travels, in their trading, and in their pursuit of information. If it's not technology disruptions or cyber attacks threatening our cities, it's earthquakes or a heat wave or a violent storm, social or political upheaval. And then there are also the slower burning stresses, such as traffic congestion, searing inequality, air and water pollution that cities must deal with every day. Kind of makes the dystopian futures in H.G. Wells' novels look a little more appealing, doesn't it? But I'm an optimist, and here's why. Not every disruption must become a disaster. We can futurize our cities by making them more resilient, making them able to better prepare for, rebound more effectively from, and even transform and grow in the face of these shocks and stresses. And through these same investments, cities not only become future-proof, they become better places to live and to work. They become more appealing places to do business because companies aren't as worried about transit lines failing or supply chain disruption. They become healthier places with more green space for recreation, more bike trails that can cut down on traffic emissions, fewer pollutants running into and contaminating our waterways. They benefit from innovations in local government that leverage a wider, data-driven online world. And they contribute to building community capacity, the importance of which cannot be overstated. All of these are examples of what we call resilience dividends. And it's the kind of investment and innovation that 67 cities around the world are putting into action right now through our 100 Resilient Cities Challenge. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we're opening the challenge for the final round of applications to become one of the remaining 33 cities to join this network, rounding out our 100. We believe that with the 4 unique supports that we offer, cities can become significantly more resilient, structurally, socially, and economically. The first support is to help cities better understand the reality of the threats they face. We find that cities sometimes overestimate a particular threat, for example, a risk of an earthquake, while downplaying vulnerabilities that are both more likely to occur and could potentially have a greater impact. For example, in the first 700 city applications, 1/4 of the cities around the world were underestimating the threat of flooding. And so the first thing we do is fund a strategy development process, which works with a very broad range of stakeholders in a 6 to 9 month process to assess where the biggest problems and the best opportunities are, and to begin building a strategy from there. Typically, because resilience is a new idea in many of these cities, there's not a single person with the responsibility for building it. Rather, it lies within several departments, as you've heard quite a lot about this morning: disaster planning, transportation, economic development, housing. But these departments sometimes don't even talk to each other. And city government may not be as effectively engaging community leaders, civil society, and the private sector as they must to become truly resilient. So the second thing we do is provide funding to hire someone who will act as a kind of conductor of this disparate orchestra of resilience builders, a position we call a Chief Resilience Officer, or CRO. The CRO is responsible for coordinating within city government and for interfacing with national and regional government, with businesses and civil society and communities to ensure that planning is integrated. 2 years ago, this position existed nowhere in the world, and today there are 30 CROs around the world, with many more ready to take their place. We stipulate in this funding that the CRO must have the ear of the top decision maker and not be just a middle manager that has to fight through red tape. After the strategy process is completed, the cities get to work. Here, our third offering is pro bono access to a group of now nearly 50 platform partners, private sector companies, universities, NGOs, and publicly funded labs that provide resilience-building tools to our cities and help them execute on their resilience strategies. This includes, for example, Swiss Re's risk assessment models, Palantir's big data analytic capabilities, Microsoft's cybersecurity tools, just to name a few. And finally, we offer membership in a true global network of future-oriented urban resilience builders. Through 100 resilient cities, cities led by their CROs have access and an open line of communication to one another around the world. And they're sharing best practices, they're bouncing ideas off one another, and they're encouraging each other to try and implement innovations in their resilience building. We saw a great example of this just last month in Norfolk, Virginia, where the Chief Resilience Officer held a 5-day workshop with a broad group of community stakeholders from Hampton Roads, bringing to them resilience experts and engineers from Rotterdam. Community members in Norfolk learned how to embrace rising coastal waters as an asset and how to begin to integrate it with economic and social infrastructure being built in the city. These exchanges weren't always formal. For example, last year when storms were approaching Ashkelon, Israel, the CRO sought advice from the CRO of New Orleans, a city 1,000 miles away, that just happens to know a little something about the importance of storm preparation. And you'll hear more about that, I think, this afternoon. 100 Resilient Cities responds to the complexities of cities of the future and the challenges of scaling good ideas globally, innovations globally. We're looking for 33 more energized cities who want to be on the leading edge of this work with us. And so if that sounds like your city, head to our website at 100resilientcities.org to start an application. The application process will be open through November 25th, and the winners will be selected in early 2016. I'm also pleased to announce today that in addition to the initial $100 million that Rockefeller put into this, we're adding $64 million more, in addition, of course, to access to all of the pro bono goods and services that exist on our platform. So this is certainly an exciting time to be part of 100 Resilient Cities, and I'd like to acknowledge in the audience the person leading that effort, Michael Berkowitz, who's here with us today, and you can grab him during the networking sessions if you're interested. Now let me take you around the world to a few of these cities and share how they're turning resilience building into some really transformative outcomes. But before I do, I'm going to take the risk of tapping into my previous life as a professor and ask you to keep in mind as you listen to 5 characteristics that all resilient cities share. This way, my examples will be more than anecdotes for you, but actually applicable lessons that you can apply in your own jobs, in your own cities. First resilience characteristic, cities that are resilient are aware of their vulnerabilities and their assets. They have both a willingness and an ability to assess, to take in new information, and to adjust to that information in real time, using robust monitoring and feedback loops. Second, they're diverse, and they're often quite redundant in the types of backups and alternatives they can access, so that if one part of the system is challenged, it can rely on another quickly. For example, the disruption in the New York Stock Exchange was not as catastrophic as it might have been even a few years ago. The reason? Diversification in the trading platforms. There are now 11 integrated exchanges, so if one goes down, the entire market no longer goes down with it, something that we saw in earlier periods. Third, they're integrated in a way that they share information, ensuring coordinated action across all components. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing, and they're working together in an integrated fashion towards the same goals. Fourth, they're self-regulating, meaning that if one part of the system fails, the entity can adjust rapidly to changing circumstances and develop new plans, take new actions, and modify behavior. And fifth, and related to that, a resilient city is adaptive. It is flexible, so that under stress it may bend, but it doesn't break. Based on these characteristics of a resilient city, let me just talk about a few important themes that have already emerged from our work. First, when disruption happens, resilient cities don't rebuild things the way they were before, because doing so opens the city up to the same weaknesses that allowed the crisis to unfold in the first place. Rather, more resilient cities reject this build back the same mindset. They find opportunities to transform, to shed their past vulnerabilities, and they don't waste time in a downward spiral of finger-pointing and blame. No city in the world has learned this better, I think, than New Orleans. And as we approach the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, we're reminded that event wasn't just about a failure of the levee system. It was about a failure, a set of failures that the floods surfaced. Lack of jobs, racial divisions, poor leadership, a weak public education system, just to name a few. Today, thousands of people are flocking to a renewed New Orleans. Why? Because the city is taking care to rebuild in a more resilient, more inclusive, and more integrated way, especially for communities historically denied opportunities. New Orleans has fundamentally changed how public education is delivered. It has diversified its economy, once dangerously reliant on oil and gas, now fostering many businesses and entrepreneurship and innovation. It has reimagined its neighborhoods with transformative results. In partnership with the state, New Orleans is working to combat its collapsing coastline. Louisiana loses an acre of land a day to coastal erosion. Just imagine that, a football field a day. But through now a 50-year, $50 billion plan, leaders are not only protecting against future huge potential economic losses that would result if the port was ever shut down, but they're restoring the wetlands very systematically in ways that will protect and revitalize the entire lower Mississippi Delta. Look, New Orleans still has a lot of work to do, including solving for its very high unemployment rate among African American males and bringing down still very high crime rates. But the resilience building process they've undertaken significantly increases their likelihood of success. Another theme we're seeing is that resilient cities all over the world are finding ways to live with water rather than trying to keep it out. We know that coastal and river cities all over the world are experiencing increasing incidents of flooding caused by sea level rise in addition to more intensive storms and storm surges. In the past, the approach has been to pave and pipe and pump to keep water out of places where it shouldn't be. But in resilient cities, water protection is embraced as both an asset and an opportunity. Like Norfolk, they can learn from Rotterdam, for example, one of our 100 resilient cities. Much of the urban areas in the Netherlands is below sea level. Yet 9 million Dutch people live in those places, and 60% of that nation's GDP is generated there. The reason? Its system of dams and weirs and storm surge mechanisms are based on a protection process that truly embraces living with water, while making those investments in a way that enhances quality of life and commerce. I saw a great example of this in a recent visit to Rotterdam, in an area that they're redeveloping in the low-lying Zoho district. We stopped to watch children playing on a basketball court, which looked like an ordinary basketball court in any other city. But had we been there after a rainstorm, we would have seen a much different scene, because the court doubles as a major water catchment facility in times of heavy rains. But in dry times, the children gather there to play basketball and hang out with their friends. Social workers are integrated on site to help local residents connect to community services. And so not only does the facility protect from flooding, it improves social cohesion, which is increasingly important for Rotterdam as they are now looking at the social aspects of building resilience. And they're asking very tough questions of themselves about how to use their investments in water to also integrate a growing immigrant population and integrate them into the economic and social fabric of that port city. Other new water resilience strategies are catching on in cities around the world. In Boulder, for example, you recall it saw historic levels of flooding and rainfall in 2013. City agencies in the recovery process paired with private developers to build a multi-purpose system where storm drains now double as bicycle trails, floodgates now double as new transportation routes and recreation areas, and ecosystem measures protect Boulder's water quality. That's the resilience dividend. And as I hinted in the Rotterdam example, a fourth learning of resilient cities is that building social resilience is as important as building physical or economic resilience. Following the waves of police violence and tensions around our country and recent terror attacks around the world, many of our 100 resilient cities are tackling the endemic problems of racial and social exclusion. Boston, a city with a checkered past when it comes to racial issues, has identified racial issues as a key goal of its work with 100 resilient cities. The city's been engaging directly and honestly with various community groups to get ahead of any tensions that could boil over down the road. And in a major acknowledgement of the city's history, Mayor Walsh announced that the Boston school curriculum would be revised to include the city's troubled busing history. That's using the resilience characteristic of awareness that I noted before. In Oakland, the Citizen Police Academy is making inroads at improving police and community relations by giving residents a firsthand look at the policies and procedures that Oakland police officers follow while they're on the job. The community classes have been so popular that there's a waiting list. Other cities are seeking solutions in which social resilience and physical and economic access are linked, drawing on the resilience principle of integration. For that story, I take you to Medellin, another of our 100 resilient cities. Medellin, Colombia, as you remember, confronted decades of drug trafficking, crime, homicide. They spent billions of dollars in police and military efforts to wipe it out, including massive amounts of support from the US government, as you know. But it wasn't working. So they took a completely radical approach. They looked at the root cause of the problem. Poor people in barrios high in the hills, geographically disconnected from the economic center of the city, were both the agents and the victims of the drug trafficking trade. The solution was to build transit systems that linked the poorest and most vulnerable communities to the economic and social core of the city down below, using a system of gondolas and hillside escalators. Indeed, the modes of transportation most commonly associated with shopping malls or fancy ski resorts now provide the connective tissue necessary to really build economic integration and social cohesion and allow the city to transform from decades of murder and drugs. The government also built healthcare clinics and daycare centers at the transit stops. So you see a completely integrated system trying to address these issues. It's also a system that provides safe and effective escape routes during emergencies. Today, Medellin is a vibrant, more resilient city with a strong tourism economy. And the murder rate has come down in 10 to 12 years, 90%. Medellin is now sharing its lessons with New Orleans to potentially help lower crime rates in the Big Easy. The fourth and final lesson is that integration and cross-sector collaboration is a critical hallmark of a truly resilient city. San Francisco, another 100 resilient city in our network, is a great example. Through work with 100 resilient cities, San Francisco's moved from a focus only on seismic resilience to a resilience plan that now is planning for sea level rise, greater community cohesion, and more inclusive housing, something that is critical for San Francisco's future. The city's embraced two resilience characteristics. They've created an integrated and adaptive plan that includes private businesses and community groups deeply in the city's planning process and in all of its resilience strategies. And interestingly, having just seen David Plouffe, San Francisco is also integrating the strategies of its sharing economy businesses, such as the rideshare company Lyft and the home share company Airbnb in its planning, because their business model, of course, is built on a resilience principle, the effective use of excess capacity. So it's an amazingly interesting integrated solution. These cities and their stories of resilience are just the beginning of the incredible transformations set to take place in cities around the world through 100 resilient cities and, of course, beyond, with the great work going on by others. With 75% of the urban infrastructure that will be in place by 2050 yet to be built, I say we have a choice ahead of us. We can build our cities to be resilient, not just future-proof, but future-ready, to unleash an age in which disruptions are just another opportunity for growth and transformation and revitalization. Or we can keep along our present course, responding rather than preparing, failing catastrophically rather than failing safely, doing city business as usual and hoping for the best. But as I said, I'm an optimist. I believe we will choose the latter, not just to make the cities of the future more resilient, but to unleash an entire resilience age. Thank you. Thank you.